Guys, Eclipse Racing League here with some fundamentals on driving on wet conditions. Usually this poses as a great challenge for some drivers um, who sometimes are are crossing fingers that the race does not involve any wet weather, and we'll try to change it here with some tips that might help you feel more comfortable tackling wet conditions. In fact, wet conditions always pose a chance for gaps to become a little less wide, since you won't have the perfect conditions to really take everything you got into the track. And if you want to close that gap to the faster drivers on your leagues and on your races, wet conditions might pose that opportunity. So after this video, we hope that you guys no longer pray for dry races only. In fact, we'll hope that you pray for wet weather, because one thing is for sure, driving on the wet is actually pretty fun. So we'll do our testing on a Grand Prix session. We'll go on to Canada. I will take the our league's car, Eclipse Racing League car. Let's Fittipaldi. He deserves a shot in F1. Why not? Okay, so let's check. So no assists. So everything on the video looks a bit more logical. So you're in full control of everything that you are doing. AI at its max, and we'll skip qualifying. We'll go on to the race. Long sessions. Majority of leagues use a 50% race distance, so we'll train on that one and let us put very wet weather. Okay, so
So with the race not far away from start.
okay, so first things first, setup wise, you don't have to make enormous setup overall from a dry race to a wet race. What you should focus is on some key areas that have indeed to meet specific settings to tackle wet races. So you do not need to worry about building an entire different setup. You can actually go from your dry setups, and with the necessary adjustments, they can become very good wet setups too. Right here on the fuel, you usually tend to burn less fuel because you won't be as aggressive on the throttle, so you can go with lower amounts of fuel than usual. This is the first thing you have to take into consideration. Your inputs in wet weather have to be much more. smooth and controlled than on the dry, and this refers to everything: throttle, braking, and turning. Calm is the key, calm and controlled. Every bit of snap that you do on either of these inputs will have massive consequences. This will become more clear when we begin the race. As per the setup, so we'll go area by area. On aerodynamics, this one is easy. This one is common knowledge. You need to buff up your wings. For this one, you can follow this idea. You'll have to run with considerably higher wings than you do on the dry, unless, of course, you're already on a track. For example, on Ring, you're already on a track where the wings are pretty high. Even there's something you can do. If you are now used to race with oversteery setups, which is a setup where your front wing exceeds the rear wing to give you a more turning capacity to your car, on the switch from dry to wet, you can actually close that gap. So, general settings, more wing. If you're already on pretty high wings, close the gaps between front wing and rear wing. This will help you make the car more stable. If you are not on a stage where you can race on a more focused front wing setup, then you can do the opposite. You can give more values to the rear wing, but bear in mind this will make the car very understeery. So for Canada, we'll choose 48-45. It will give you a decent amount of steering, and it's a pretty stable choice. Transmission. This does not vary much. You usually go around 50 to 55 on the on throttle. You can actually keep the same criteria as you do on the dry race. If you are feeling it a bit too snappy, then you can reduce. But going on 55 is doable depending on the track. If you are feeling it less, very prone to rear snaps, then you can reduce this value. But do not forget, the work will be done not entirely with your setup, but from your inputs. If your inputs are careless, setup will not make it any easier for you. As per the off throttle, I've seen that this is actually buffed from dry to wet. So I've seen that most of the times the wet setup will make it will give a bigger amount on the off throttle. I'm assuming that this is to allow the car, when you are off the throttle, as the name states, this allows the car to have a more controlled reaction. You're gonna need that control on wet weather. As per suspension geometry, you can actually keep the same amount, which usually is what we commonly refer to right, left, left. You can take those settings to wet races too. As per the suspension, keep it more tight in the front. You just have to soften it a bit comparing to your dry setup. On the rear, you're gonna have to really make it considerably more soft. This is in order to cope a little better with the power transfer on the wet, which is very, very hard to accomplish. Same criteria here for the anti-roll bars. You need an agile car on the reins, so really put these values more to the soft than to the firm, with a little more focus on the front anti-roll bar. If you are not yet comfortable with more understeery setups, then you can charge a little more on the rear. These two will play the biggest part. The ride height. This will allow you a more effective clearance of the water below the car. So this one is where you will actually have a big change. Compared to the dry setup, I would advise you to really pump in those values on the rear ride height. This one you can increase the difference. This will help stability. If you are not feeling it yet comfortable on the front, please increase the amounts on the front, but keep it really uneven here. It will help you a lot during the race to keep the car stable and to keep the power transfer to the wheel controlled. As per braking, braking is so much different on the wet. You are used to especially on hard braking zones, and you will see that in Canada. You are used to make a very first hard braking input, but on the wet, this will immediately lead to front wheel locking. If you are going to keep this on 100%, which is possible, you have to be very, very careful modulating your braking inputs. If you feel that you are locking frequently, then you'll need to reduce this amount. As per the brake bias, you can also keep the same meta from your dry setup. As per tires, since you are running on a lower track temperature, you can buff a little those pressures to add more temperature to your tires. On tracks with already high aero charges on the dry, you can pretty much use the same setup in intermediate conditions and on very wet conditions. Here in Canada, where you are able to go with a lower aero on dry conditions, then for intermediates you'll need to find a middle ground between your dry setup and your very wet setup. It's a matter of testing. Okay, so setup is picked. Now let's see some fundamentals for the race. I will try to give you comments whenever it's necessary, but for me the most effective way is to focus on the telemetry inputs. They will be displayed right above the wheel. I drive with cockpit cam, and for me that's the best lesson you can take from this video. Also, take this into consideration. You have to tackle corners most of the time with one lower gear than you do it on the dry. So imagine if you, let's say T1 in Canada, which I usually do on fourth gear. For this one, I will do it on third gear. I will avoid going into second gear since the power output when you return to the throttle is much more difficult. The return to the throttle will be much easier if you stick to short shifting techniques and somehow to a higher gear than it can be necessary. But if you keep it on low revs, you will avoid those constant whiplashes much more effectively. Okay, let's start. The start is always so cramped up. Okay, so from this first lap, as you probably may have noticed, another thing you really need to do is to extend your braking zones. So take whatever reference points you have on the dry and extend them quite considerably. You won't be able to use the same reference points because you won't be able to brake on the same manner. As you could probably see on this first lap, although the pack runs really stacked. Let's hope we have a lap where gaps are more wide and I can do a more considerable pace. As you probably have noticed, braking is done in a very controlled manner, just to, just like using it not to slow the car, but to control the car going to the turns. So for this one, you have to think of your braking as a method of gradually reducing the speed that you need to be to tackle the corners. Um, as per the throttle inputs, even from the race start, you did notice that it takes quite some time to return to full throttle. And when you do it, it's wise to have the car in a higher gear, and you also need to feel the grip really steady on your hands. This will vary from the equipment you use. I actually cannot provide any tips for controllers because I don't use a controller, but this will make more sense depending on the equipment you use. If you have an equipment which translates a good force feedback feeling, naturally you will be much more able to tell when you have reached that perfect grip point. Traction zones on the wet are also very scarce. You have to tread carefully among the corner and you look for that sweet spot where you can start feeding the throttle and the power input with a very close attention to not let it over rev because you will snap. Also, if you miss braking points, do not overcompensate with braking harder. It will not work. It's best to let it go a little more wide, let it go um, let it go straight all the way until you feel the point where you can start turning the car. If you miss the braking point and try to compensate with hard braking and sharp turning, there will be no grip for you to succeed in your attempt. Let's begin lap 2. Okay, two more notes. Flat corners. Flat corners on most of the tracks on the wet may not be possible. However, you can tackle them by lifting a bit on the throttle. That's what happens in Canada after the beginning of the lap where you have T1, T2, then you have that first chicane. After that first chicane, there is a small kink to the right, which on dry conditions is done flat. On wet conditions, you will notice that you probably may need to lift a little bit on the throttle. But usually, if it's done flat, you can avoid going on to the brakes. But as you will probably know, this all depends on experimentation, conditions, and also tire wear. So, I would also like to approach overtaking on the wet. I will try to overtake this Williams in front of me during the next lap, and I will try to do it on the hairpin in Canada before the last before the big straight with the DRS zone. I will try to show you, for me, the best strategies to overtake, especially because on the wet you cannot take as much risk as on the dry. See, it happened here. I missed my braking point. I chose to go in front. So due to my mistake, I have lost the chance to take on the Williams. I will try to do it on the next lap. I am choosing this spot because it's a good place to show you two possibilities. On overtakes, either you take advantage from your braking, but you have to be modulating it very carefully and better than your opponent so you can take more advantage while going on the corner. Or one of my favorites, if you are comfortable with your throttle inputs, you can actually perform the overtake on the exit of the corner by getting a much better traction on the corner exit. That corner will allow those two possibilities. I will try on the next lap to overtake the Williams. Let's hope I don't make any mistake until the Epingle, the name of the Canada hairpin. Just one thing, if somehow the car snaps just like it did here, no worries, it can happen. If you even if you are doing it on a very controlled manner, the car can snap. But obviously, if you are taking the proper care, those snaps won't be as drastic as they can be, and it is possible to counter them. You have two possibilities. Either you immediately upshift, so the revs become lower, thus the power output reduces too, and you will have much more control, or you have to do an opposite lock technique. Usually, opposite steering technique. Opposite lock is different. Basically, if you feel the car snapping to one side, you turn to the other. The best example is what Alonso did in China last weekend. That is one of the best counter steering moves I've ever seen in my life. So if you need an example on that, don't listen to me. Just watch what Alonso did in China. I did it now. So, as you can see, by modulating my braking, I could overtake the Williams. Um, it was not a matter of braking later than the Williams. That would be a terrible idea. It's a matter of gently distribute your braking in a more balanced way than your opponent car. I'm trying to remember the slow motion button. Uh, well, once again, as you can see, just by releasing the brake a little bit mid braking zone, I could gain a little more speed and complete the overtake. Um, I will now try to overtake the next Williams by using a better traction of out of the corner. I will try to do it on T2. Okay, it wasn't possible on T2 because I failed the braking. The Williams went a bit slower than I thought, and I had to brake a little harder than I was expecting. So I will try it on the airpin. Remember, the purpose is to overtake the car by getting a better exit. Almost. I tried, but it wasn't possible over there. You have to naturally be very careful because overdoing it will make you lose your car. Let's try again on T2. Whoa! Okay, not what I was going for, but I think you got the idea. As you could see, the car traction better than the Williams and gained because of it, but then I was a bit careless. To finish, I will now show you the consequences of doing perhaps the two most common mistakes on wet driving, which is braking late and returning to the throttle with in an uncontrolled manner. You will see that When we will see that right from braking heavily, the car will immediately lock wheels, and as soon as it lock wheels, becomes uncontrollable, and it will drift forwards. Or by trying to overcompensate, it will simply slide and spin. So you next set of corners will not work out fine. Whoa. As you could see, it immediately locked up. As soon as it locked up, when I tried to compensate, it became uncontrollable. Do not forget that by each downshift you make, the car will kind of whiplash a bit. The further you downshift, the more whiplash it will become. It by trying to complete the corner without having any grip at all and reducing gears in an uncontrolled manner, it simply spun on me. As you could see, from that point, it was impossible to control and it would be better to just let it go in front. So you don't forget, if you miss your braking points, it's best to let it go, keep controlling it and reducing speed until you can actually turn. Now, the second part too, for uncareful return on the throttle, I will use the hairpin for that. As you can see, it simply does not turn. If you try to punch in the throttle, even if it feels steady, because it actually felt steady, if you try to punch in the throttle, it will immediately snap and you won't be able to turn the car. So, as you probably read somewhere, the best way to handle throttle on wet weather, it's like if you have an egg below the pedal and you need to press the pedal without cracking the egg. That's actually a very good tip. Also, you can focus on the telemetry to see how the throttle inputs work. Okay, so just to finish the video, I will try to I will attempt at the fastest lap of the session for the moment, so you can see what a full lap on the wet how it really handles. Oh man, looks like we didn't do it. We beat our lap, but not the best lap of the session. Okay, so this is it from now. For now, stay in touch for more videos on racing fundamentals. If you have any questions, just drop a comment, and we will try to answer. And really hope this helps you enjoying wet races much more because they're actually pretty fun and a very cool challenge. Cheers!